Good morning, everyone. Nice to see those of you online and in the Zendo. Thank you, Concho, for hosting us online, and to Howard and Bokashu, all the folks in the Zendo helping with the tech side as well. And I'm not going to comment on David's work because I want you to hear from David directly. And I will be just very brief. I just wanted to say a warm word of welcome to David. We're very glad to have him back with us. He's been with us at Village Zendo a number of times in the past. We were hoping he would be able to be with us in person today at our new space. That didn't work out, but it's fortunate to have him online. And maybe next time we'll have you in person and you'll see the new space, David. But I just wanted to say, I think that oftentimes people think about what we do, the meditation or Zen or Buddhism, as being about some kind of personal salvation. And um, eh, what's sometimes not so clear is what the broader social or planetary implications may be of our practice and of Buddhist ethics and principles or philosophy. This is something that people have been thinking about. We have the um, social engaged Buddhism that has emerged in the latter half of the 20th century, which Enkyo Roshi and the Village Zendo and the Zen peacemakers, whom we're affiliated with, have been involved in for a long time. And I noticed that David is also a member of the Zen peacemaker order, if I'm not mistaken. So this is an issue that's really, it's not a new issue, but it's one which is very urgent. And David has been one of the leading voices in trying to help us think about how our practice and our precepts and Buddhist thought is connected to and applicable to the issues, the challenges, the crises of our time. So I wanted to again welcome David and thank you for being with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing, which I think is important for the broader public awareness. So welcome.
You can go ahead and unmute, David. Thank you.
Having unmuted, maybe I should check. Can everyone see and hear me okay? Great. Well, first of all, thank you for that very warm introduction and for this invitation. I'm really very happy to be back with the Village Zendo, in a manner of speaking. I would like to begin with something that I remember almost every day. It's something that Noam Chomsky said in an interview in the early days of the COVID pandemic. He said that right now is the most dangerous time in human history. And frankly, since then, things have gotten worse. Why did he say that? There was no reference to COVID. He didn't speak of that, even though it was having a big impact at that time. He mentioned three things. Number one, the climate crisis, and I find it curious that he didn't talk about the larger ecological crisis, right? He didn't mention extinction, species extinction event, or loss of forest, loss of topsoil, toxic pollutants in the air, earth, sea, our bodies. The second thing he mentioned was the danger of nuclear war, and this was before Russia invaded Ukraine. And he mentioned the decline of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism. And this was I think it was September 2020. It was in the late stages of Trump's first term as president, but long before January 6th, when he tried to avoid stepping down. And of course, since then, he's been reelected, and this was long before what we've been experiencing in the last couple months. So I don't want to say anything more about this poly crisis, this crisis with many aspects, many heads. But putting it all together, it does make me wonder. I mean, in the last century, we have finally attained what might be called a truly global civilization. And I can't help wondering sometimes if it's in the process of self-destructing. The question for us, of course, is what does Buddhism or Buddhisms, the different Buddhist traditions, what do they offer that can help us understand and respond to this? I'm reminded of a couple Zen Mondo. In one of them, a student asked the master, what should we do when difficult times come? And the master said, embrace them, become one with them. You could say that our path isn't about avoiding difficult times. In fact, often difficult times are when the deepest kind of transformation occurs, right? The Lotus Sutra says that the lotus blossoms in the midst of fire. Another Mondo, and I actually remember the name of the Roshi here, the Zen or Chan master, Master Unmon in Japanese. The student asked him, what's the fruit of a lifetime of practice? And he said, responding appropriately. Something I love because it reminds us our practice isn't about secluding ourselves in a cave or in a Zen monastery and simply focusing on our own salvation as if we're able to ignore and transcend this everyday world, but rather what our practice cultivates is the ability to respond appropriately to whatever arises. And that's the big question, isn't it? That's the Genjo Koan, the great koan for all of us. How do we respond to such an extraordinary poly crisis? And what does Buddhism have to offer here? I mean, one answer is maybe nothing. I mean, if you remember, the Buddha and indeed all the Asian Buddhist traditions, they're all pre-modern. The Buddha lived maybe 2,400 years ago in a very different time and place, Iron Age, India, right? The problems that he and that all the other Asian Buddhist traditions were responding to, they're very different than what we have now. So we know we can't turn to any of the Buddhist texts, the sutras or commentaries. They're not going to give us specific answers about what we should be doing now, because technologically, economically, sociologically, we live in such a different world. Nonetheless, of course, and this is where I think we can gain some, really important insight. There are lots of important implications in the Buddhist teachings. And what I'd like to talk about this morning is what I think is the single most important thing that Buddhism has to offer us today, which is the Bodhisattva Path. Or, as I sometimes say, the new Bodhisattva Path, because I think sometimes we need to tweak it a bit. Sometimes thinking ecologically, we talk about the eco-sattva path. Anyway, there's a lot in Mahayana Buddhist literature about the Bodhisattva path, and that's quite accessible. I don't need to talk much about the main things, right? Traditionally, bodhisattvas don't focus on the Noble Eightfold Path of early Buddhism. They develop six paramitas, perfections. They develop 6 character traits to the highest possible degree, right? Generosity, ethical behavior, endurance, persistence, some kind of contemplative path, and then wisdom, non-dual wisdom, prajna paramita. As I said, you can look that up. What I would want to focus on are, I think, three aspects of the Bodhisattva path that may be most important for us, or certainly we can benefit from zooming in on those and emphasizing those. So that's what I'm going to talk about this morning, these three aspects of the Bodhisattva path. Number one being to remind us that bodhisattvas have a double path, right? On the one hand, they continue to work on their own personal individual transformation through practice of the sort that we were doing this morning, zazen, for example. At the same time, they are aware that that's not sufficient, that it's important to be engaged in the world, helping people, and as we might add today, indeed, helping the earth. And it's not simply a matter that these two things go together. I think we can say that we can see that actually these two really need each other if either of them is going to be as successful as we need them to be, these two sides, personal and social transformation. I don't know if you're a social or ecological activist, but maybe you know somebody, and in either case, it's a difficult path, right? It's often very frustrating because often we're unsuccessful. It takes a great deal of work, a great deal of commitment, often self-sacrifice, and things don't work out the way that we would want them to. So it's very easy to get frustrated, bummed out, depressed, burned out. And that's why it's so important for us, and indeed for everyone, to be able to ground this kind of activism in some kind of contemplative practice, which can help sort of help us recenter or ground ourselves. On the other side, I think it's just as important for Buddhists, especially but not only today, to become engaged. Let me try to say a little bit more about why I think that's so necessary. I think when we come to something like Zen practice, why do we do it? It's because there's something missing, something isn't quite right in our own lives. I sometimes call it a sense of lack. Our lives aren't working as well as we would like them to be. You know, something feels like it's missing. And so we have the sense that there's something about the way that our minds work, and that if we devote ourselves to this practice, maybe, that can our lives will get better. And often they do, right, through the practice. But as we get more deeply into the practice, what we begin to realize is that at the root of our dukkha, of our dissatisfaction, of our sense of lack or basic problem, is the delusion of a separate self. Right? That which is interesting, because if there's a way in which, insofar as we remain preoccupied with our own state of mind, our own serenity, our own enlightenment, that's what's important in the practice, you could say we can end up reinforcing what is the fundamental problem, the delusion of a self that feels separate from the rest of the world, that feels its own well-being is separate from what's going on elsewhere, right? I'm reminded of something that, see if I can find it here. Something Franz Kafka said in a letter. You can hold back from the sufferings of the world. That is something you can do, he said. But perhaps this very holding back is the one suffering you could avoid. The idea that the holding back is itself a form of suffering. What is the holding back? Again, it's reinforcing that delusion of separation. This also reminds me of maybe my all-time favorite quotation, not by a Buddhist, but by a Neo-Vedantin named Nisargadatta, who I think captured so much in this very short phrase or line. He said, "When I look inside and see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that is love. Between these two, my life flows." The wisdom of seeing through self, the love, or as we more often say in Buddhism, the compassion that applies that to how we actually relate to other people in the world, right? Love here is not a feeling, but it's a way of being that embodies this realization of non-separation. I think this is really important in Buddhism because I think we often are in this, we can easily fall into this, I don't know, what is it, stereotype of, think of somebody like Milarepa in the Tibetan tradition, the great yogi who secludes himself in a cave and supposedly goes all the way to Buddhahood in one lifetime because, he devotes himself so much to the practice. Frankly, I wonder, and I'm reminded here of something Joanna Macy said, that the world has a role to play. Well, let me quote her. "It's my experience that the world itself has a role to play in our awakening. Its very brokenness and need call to us, summoning us to walk out of the prison of self-concern." Ram Dass liked to say, "So, you think you're enlightened, huh? Well, go spend the holidays with your family. Go spend the holiday," right? I think that puts, we'll see pretty quickly where we're still stuck, right? He also talked about our practice as a kind of self-sharpening sword. We meditate, then we go out and we're in the world and we see where we're still stuck. And then that helps us when we come back to our meditation. So there's a kind of reciprocal thing going on back and forth. And there's no better way to go out in the world. I mean, if you really want to see where we're stuck, let's get engaged and do the best we can there. In short, engagement with the world's problems, it's so important for us not to think of that as a distraction from our practice. Rather, what I'm really trying to emphasize is that it's an essential part of it. That the one who benefits most from the activism, from the efforts of a bodhisattva is usually the bodhisattva herself or himself. As Kukai, or that's Kobodaishi, another name, the founder of Japanese Shingon, as he put it, right? The measure of our enlightenment is how we serve others. So that's the first point, right? The two sides of the coin. We work on our own transformation, but we see through the delusion of separation and realize that that cannot be separated from our engagement with others, with the world. Point number 2. I like to talk about the new Bodhisattva path because in some ways I think we have a different and frankly a better understanding of dukkha, the suffering that the Buddha talked about, right? I mean, the Buddha was very clear. That's all he was interested in. He said in the Pali Canon, all I have to teach is dukkha and how to end it. The Four Noble Truths are all about dukkha, right? The cause of dukkha, the end of dukkha, the path to end dukkha, right? But the way the Buddhist tradition has developed, and I'm not even sure this is, it sometimes seems to me the Buddha was more socially engaged than the early texts, the Pali Canon suggests. When you think of his attitude toward caste, the way that, when you join the order, right? When you become a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, you lose caste. Everyone's equal. Also his attitude toward women, pretty radical given that time in India, the way he created a bhikkhuni sangha for women. But the way the Buddhist tradition has developed, of course, is that um, the emphasis is very much the dukkha is basically our own fault, right? Don't blame anyone else. And if you find yourself in a difficult situation, well, that's because of your own karma, right? Karma, because of past lifetimes. And this can create some really weird things if we take it too literally. I remember one teacher who will remain nameless saying, reflecting, oh, what terrible karma all of those Jews in Nazi Europe must have had to be born at that time and place. The implication being, in a way, that was they had created it because that was their karma working itself out. And I thought, that's really unacceptable, blaming the victim in that way. In India too, of course, we have the Dalits, the former untouchables. And why are they considered untouchable? Well, it's because of their karma. They're born as untouchable because they did some bad things in earlier lifetimes. So again, it's a way of rationalizing that kind of thing. I think we need to understand dukkha, the suffering that the Buddha is talking about, in a more expansive way today. Um, Unlike, say, Christianity or the Abrahamic religions in general, which focus on good versus evil, right? Buddhism, the primary issue is delusion versus wisdom. But the way the delusion or ignorance plays out is in these three poisons or three fires, right? Some greed, ill will, delusion. I think we're all familiar with them. Um, but again, they've been understood in an individual way. We work on them. These are my problems, my greed, my ill will, my delusion, and that's what I've got to work on the path. I think what we really need to realize today is that these three poisons are not just individualized, they are collective. They have actually taken on a life of their own. In other words, they have become institutionalized. And so we not only need to work on our own greed, ill will, delusion, we need to understand and find ways to address the institutionalized greed, ill will, delusion that are operative in the world. What do I mean by that? Well, frankly, if greed means you never have enough, you always want more, I think that's a pretty good description of 21st century American capitalism, isn't it? Consumers always want more, but especially um, wealthy people want to be wealthier. Corporations, right? They want to be more profitable, bigger market share, higher stock prices, right? I'm thinking now of the wealthiest person in the world and how he wants more. Um, Likewise, institutionalized ill will. Well, I think we need to remember that if militarism is measured by the amount of resources we put into it, by far the most militarized society or nation in human history is the United States now. And of course, when you have that kind of military, you're going to use it once in a while, not always wisely, thinking about, well, there's so many examples, but most recently Vietnam, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth. Institutionalized delusion. When I first started talking about that, I was focusing a lot on sort of advertising, but in the last decade, I mean, we have become so much more familiar with the fake news and the way that that can be manipulated. Uh, we see that, I think, has played a major role in the political developments of the last decade or so. So, it does seem to me that in the last couple decades, or I guess, yeah, certainly since I began practice in the 70s, Buddhists in the US have become much more aware. There's been more emphasis on social engagement, but it's still primarily kind of on the individual level, individuals helping other individuals, by which I mean things like, helping homeless people, prison Dharma, going into prisons, helping them meditate, uh, uh, Zen hospices, and so forth, all of which I think are extremely wonderful. But frankly, it's not enough. I think you could say we have become better at pulling drowning people out of the river, but we also really need to be asking, especially today, why are there so many more drowning people in the river? Who or what is pushing them in upstream? And we've got to address that. Bill McKibben, when he was in Paris for the UN climate talks, I think it was 2015, he was approached by someone who asked him, well, but what can I do as an individual? And he said, stop being an individual. Stop thinking of ourselves and living as if we are separate individuals. Sure, we need to do individual things like, reducing our carbon footprint. But there are also things that we can only do together, right? If the problems have been institutionalized, we have to have much stronger sanghas in order to respond to that. Working on an individual level just isn't going to work, right? And it does seem to me that is still a major challenge for American Buddhism. And I'll be interested in your response here, but if you think about the three treasures, the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, seems to me we have a lot of teachers and we have a lot of teachings, no lack of that, but especially because we're not primarily institutionalized as bhikkhus or monks, right? The Sangha, the community effort, there's still some issues there, So I think there's still the tendency we come together maybe in a Sunday morning to sit and to listen to a Dharma talk, and then we go home and we're living the usual American extremely individualized life again. And given what's happening now, given how I'm just reminded, Thich Nhat Hanh, right? The next Buddha may appear as a Sangha, as a community, and it seems to me we're going to need stronger communities, people reinforcing each other as we face these what seem to be increasingly difficult times, right? Okay, that's the second point. Third and final point. The Bodhisattva Path does not tell us what to do. As I said earlier, our situation is so different, right? Obviously it can't. But it tells us a lot about how to do it. And what I want to focus on today is that bodhisattvas act without attachment to the results of what they do. I think that's one of the most distinctive and powerful things about spiritual activism, being non-attached to the results of action. The Buddha even says in the Pali Canon that one of the characteristics of an awakened person is that their actions are nirasa, which could be translated as, in a way, without expectation or not clinging. In aphorism 28 of the Tibetan Lojong training, there's a classic formulation of this quote: abandon any hope or expectation of fruition. Don't get caught up in how you will be in the future. Stay in the present moment. Which seems to me so important, but also very easy to misunderstand, right? Especially given the way that Buddhism emphasizes motivation or intention, right? It's easy to sort of start thinking, especially if we're focused only on our own development, to think, what's really important is my motivation, right? Purifying my intentions. It doesn't matter if anything ever gets accomplished, in which case it probably won't. So what I'd like to do is end by just unpacking what it means to act without attachment to results. First, please consider the difference between running say, a 100-meter dash and running a marathon, right? With a 100-meter dash, you don't have time to think about anything but getting to the other end as quickly as possible, the goal. But obviously, you can't run a marathon that way, or you will burn yourself out very quickly, right? In the marathon, it's interesting, not that I've run marathons, but talking to friends, including Zen friends who have, they say, it's important not to get preoccupied with the goal. The important thing is to be here now, to focus on just this step, right? In Japan, there's tada, just this. And in Buddhism too, we sometimes talk about the Buddha as the Tathagata, the one who just comes, the one who just goes, right? The point being, you don't really have to focus so completely on the goal. As long as you're going the right direction, you will eventually get there, right? And of course, this is what our practice has always encouraged us to do, that, you know, when we're meditating, when our minds wander, what do? We come back to now. But there's much more to say. A marathon, it's 26 miles and something, but there's still a goal, there's still an endpoint. What about not a race, but a path with no end? And here, of course, I'm referring back to the Bodhisattva Path, right? In particular, the four vows, which we will probably be reciting at the end of this morning. The first one being something like, living beings, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. If we really understand what that means, right? I mean, how can we avoid being overwhelmed? In one way, it's crazy because we're vowing to do something that cannot possibly be accomplished. But that's the point. It's not about achieving an end, but a reorientation in the meaning of our lives away from our usual self-preoccupation, what's in it for me, and rather, in connection with this insight about our non-separation. What can I do and what can we do together to make this a better world for everyone, right? So the fact that the vow can't be fulfilled isn't a problem. It's actually the main point. And someone who has volunteered for this job is not going to be intimidated, I think, by challenges of this most dangerous time in human history, as Chomsky referred to it. Rather, it's a new way of living, right? A different way of being in the world. And this is where, again, our individual practice becomes so important. So we're out there, maybe we try to do something, some activism, and we're successful. We don't sort of, okay, well, that's done, that's nice, I'm finished. There's always more to do, isn't there? We may need to take a little rest, recuperate, as it were, but yeah, there's no end to this. Likewise, if we're frustrated, if things don't work out the way we would like, well, we try again a different way. Or maybe we realize that the way we were trying wasn't the best way, that we have to approach it in a completely different way. But the point is, we don't give up. We may give up in terms of a particular goal, but this whole orientation to doing what we can to, making this a better world, that doesn't end. And it's not, I think this is so important. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a kind of a heavy, oh, I've got to do it again. It's more, this is just how we naturally want to live once we realize our true nature, right? Who was it who said, I think it was Sri Aurobindo, was it? I slept and I dreamt that life is joy. I woke and I realized that life is service. I acted, and I realized that service is joy. Love that. Yeah. This is simply the way that we want to live instead of preoccupied with our own, what I call lack projects, ways of trying to fill up. It's like these lack projects are because this sense of separate self is empty, right? We try to fill up this sense of lack with money or fame or, power, beautiful bodies, whatever. And, they don't work. But this is not a lack project. It's the Bodhisattva Path gives us an alternative to our usual preoccupation with those kinds of lack projects. Anyway, there's a third and a final point that stands out most for me, and let me end with this. Let's be honest, this dangerous situation that Chomsky talked about, it does look very difficult. And there's a very real possibility that what we do will be in vain. For example, just thinking in terms of climate, it's very possible that we are very close to or have already passed turning points, right? Tipping points where civilization as we know it is not going to be able to continue, right? There's the very real possibility that our efforts may be in vain, and certainly there are climate scientists who are becoming increasingly pessimistic, at least in private and sometimes publicly. We can't anticipate, we don't really know what's going to happen, but it doesn't look good. We just don't know, right? We just don't know. Just don't know. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that one of the great principles of our practice, right? Several wonderful koans talking about it. Not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing is the first tenet of the Zen peacemakers, right? Not knowing and then bearing witness to the joys and sorrows of the world, and then taking actions that arise from that not knowing and bearing witness, right? But this is a special kind of not knowing. It's not the not knowing of ignorance and the frustration that usually comes from that. It's a kind of openness. We become more spacious, more aware of our reactivity, more open to the perspectives of others. So it's not a fixed position, but it's a way of engaging with the world, a world that we know is always transforming. And what we do in response, we are ready to transform too as the situation or our understanding of the situation changes. There's a lovely little poem by Wendell Berry, great poet, called The Real Work. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. One of my teachers, Robert Aiken in Hawaii, he liked to say that our task, it's not about clearing up the mystery, but making the mystery clear. So this path we're on, it's not about, oh, now I understand everything about the way the world works. It's about opening up to a mysterious and sacred world, constantly transforming. And this is how we access that mystery. We don't grasp it, we open up to it, and we are taken in it. We rest serenely in it. That's how we manifest something greater than our egos. And this way of understanding not knowing is not debilitating, but empowering, because it liberates us from dogmatism and other fixed ideas about ourselves and the world. We do the best we can in response to the best we know, although we never know for sure what's happening or what is possible. I think it's important to emphasize here, this doesn't have anything to do with optimism or pessimism. And I think that, the relationship between them, that's a near perfect example of the kind of dualistic thinking that we can get trapped in. Optimism, pessimism, the meaning of each is dependent upon the other. And it's so easy to get caught up and sort of flip from one to the other. Bodhisattvas aren't motivated by optimism, nor are they motivated by hope, right? Joanna Macy said something, I think, really wise here. I find that assuring people there's hope, including myself, is not all that useful. In Buddhism, there is no word for hope. I don't remember any Buddhist teaching, traditional teaching, that talks about hope, right? Very different from, remember Paul, Christianity, faith, hope, and charity, and all that. Hope, that's not an essential trait that we're encouraged to develop. Hope would be viewed as a distraction from what's at hand, she says. Takes you out of the present moment into conjecture. I think all we can really affirm is where we want to put our attention. We have a choice. Do we want to give up and surrender to the great unraveling? Or do we want to join those working for a livable future? In other words, hope, also you have to remember Joanna Macy wrote a book called Active Hope, too. But, hope isn't sort of a feeling or wishful thinking, but active hope for her is a kind of awareness of future possibilities and working toward that, right? But the other thing to emphasize is that what bodhisattvas are motivated by, instead of optimism or hope, they're motivated by love. Motivated by love. And that's why we can be non-attached to result, because we still want to do the best we can, right? Think of yourself. Maybe you're sitting by the bedside of somebody, a dear relative or friend that you really love, and it looks really bad. There's a pretty good chance that they're going to die. We don't say, "Oh, doesn't look good. Well, I'm going home here." No, you just want to be there. You want to do the best you can, even though you don't know, what's going to come out of it, right? Wendell Berry again said, "We don't have the right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only right we have is to ask, what's the right thing to do? What does this earth require of us if we want to continue living on it?" This points to a different kind of pair, right? Instead of hope and despair, pessimism, optimism, whatever, gratitude and its pair, not its opposite, but its pair, gratitude and grief. Underlying both of which is love here and now, right? I remember I once saw a little monument in downtown London, monument to the victims of 9/11 in New York, and all it said was, this is the only thing at all. Grief is the price we pay for love. And it's important to distinguish grief from despair. Grief is here and now. Despair, like hope, is a kind of a head trip about the future, right? Somebody called Martin Solreer, I don't know anything about him, but he said, "The world doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be loved. That's how you save it." This is what points to the deepest meaning of non-attachment to results. Our job, our task is to do the very best we can, not knowing what the consequences will be, not knowing if our efforts will make any difference whatsoever. Have we already passed those tipping points? civilization as we know it is doomed? We don't know, but it's okay that we don't know, right? Of course, there's intention. We try to be strategic. We try to do the best we can. But ultimately, what we do, what we need to do today is our gift to each other, our gift to the earth. And if you think about it, you know, if you give a gift because you expect something in return, is that really a gift? I mean, a gift freely given without expectations, right? We don't know if what we do is important, but it's important for us to do it. Of course, to act without any attachment to results, that's very difficult and maybe in some sense impossible in that, it's going to be hard to let go of that hook. But, we're not called upon to be perfect, right? We're called upon to do the best we can. And again, that's what points to this wonderful practice we have, where if we are attached, if we do feel frustrated, well, guess what? We have our zazen, we have our meditation, which can bring us back to the center, right? Can ground us where we can see what's happening and let go of our expectations and our hopes there, right? It seems to me, frankly, that if we Buddhists, cannot do this, act in this way, the ways that I've talked about, then maybe Buddhism isn't what the world needs right now. But what I've tried to do is to show that so much of what Buddhism has to say with the Bodhisattva Path seems to be so appropriate, so much what's needed right now. Let me end by reading you something written by Tom Rivet Karnak, who I think, as I understand it, he played a major role in those Paris climate talks I mentioned. I mentioned when Bill McKibben was there. I think he nails it. He reminds us why, it's all hands on deck now. Quote, "You have the biggest opportunity in all of human history to live an incredibly meaningful life. The actions that you take because of the accident of the time of your birth, right? The fact that we just happen to be living right here and now at this most dangerous time in human history. These actions are of an order of magnitude in importance, right? Much more important compared to most people who've lived before. Because you are going to affect the future of life on Earth. In 50, 500, and 500,000 years by what you do in the next couple of decades. So no one is asking for an easy life. Really deep down, what we're asking for is a meaningful life. And we are being given that. And with what Buddhism says about the Bodhisattva Path, we're also being given the guidelines that we need to live that meaningful life. So let me stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei. So we have time for one or two questions. I'm going to hand us over to Bokushu Sensei in the Zendo in New York, first of all. Let me just make sure I can get that. Oh. Well, if you have, raise your hand if you're online, and we hopefully will get to you.
So I just want to make it available to anyone in the Zendo. If you need to stand, because we have been sitting a while, just feel free to stand in your place if you need to. But do we, as we were just invited, do we have any questions for David Loy? Is there anyone here who would like to ask him a question? I'm not seeing questions, maybe later, but right at the moment there are none. So Concho, you can see if the online audience has questions.
Indeed. Let's see, we have one hand up here somewhere. I'm going to get to it. Bear with me. I am only as good as the speed of my mouse.
I'm noticing that Su Yang has his hand up.
Get to Yang. I can't see him on my.
Well, he's in one of the screens, so
Yes,
just
there we are. Too Yang. I'm sorry, Too Yang. Give me a split second. Um, uh, Just go. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, bear with me a second. How about now? Try again.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Kancho. Thank you, David, for your wisdom. Um, I guess what I've been thinking about is, there's a lot of focus on climate change among activists, and I myself have always thought about other two other topics. One of them is the plastics crisis, you know, and the other one is uh, something that I have always lamented, which is the loss of biodiversity in the world. And like there's a little patch of rainforest somewhere in the world that gets burned down right now, and there are all these species of plants and animal that go extinct, a lot of which we don't even uh, know, like no, they haven't even been described by science. There was a statistic about the area that was burnt in Brazil last year was the size of Italy. Just imagine that. And so a few years ago, I attended a Zoom event, and the person who was speaking was he's kind of famous in our Buddhist circles as a scholar of he writes about the sort of like Chinese origins of Chan, and the topic of the Anthropocene came up, and the topic of the great extinction that we're witnessing right now came up. And his attitude was, or what he said was basically, oh, well, this will be, if there is a major and a big extinction right now, this will be the sixth. So his attitude was sort of like, oh, what's the big deal? It already happened 5 times. And which made me really, really angry. And so I don't know what he was thinking or what he was feeling, but something that came up to me was also the koan about the aeonic fire. The one where when one monk asked another at the end of a trillion kalpas, when the great fire burns everything down, is this destroyed or not? And one teacher says, yes, it is destroyed, and the other one says, no, it is not. Why is it not destroyed? Because it's part of it. So that's some of the stuff that I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me agree with you completely about acknowledging that although we tend to get preoccupied with the climate crisis, it's important to see that's just the tip of the iceberg of the much larger ecological crisis that includes the extinction event. You mentioned plastics. I mentioned loss of topsoil and forest. I think it's important to acknowledge this because it's possible to think, oh, if we just shift to renewable sources of energy quickly enough, then everything will be okay. Well, no, everything won't be okay. The climate crisis is a symptom of something much larger, which is, I think, our collective sense of separation from the natural world, from the rest of the biosphere. And there's a kind of interesting, I think, profound parallel. Buddhism has always addressed our individual sense of separation, and what we're facing right now in terms of ecology is a collective version of the same thing. That the way things have evolved, historically, technologically, we feel, separate as a species, right? Other species, the rest of the world is just here for us to exploit. Um, and it sort of, therefore, our well-being is separate from theirs. And of course, what the eco crisis is reminding us is that, well, no, we're part of the earth, and if the biosphere or if ecosystems get sick, we're going to get sick, and if they perish in some way, so will we. So I agree with you completely on that. Yeah. Also, I think it's easy too in Buddhism, to sort of talk about our essential nature, the true nature of things, in a way that makes us indifferent to what's going on, right? It's so easy to distinguish what my teachers called the essential world, our essential nature, from the phenomenal world. And I think what's really important, what really needs to be emphasized today is form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It's not that the phenomenal world is in some sense separate from the essential world. It's a manifestation. It's the way that the essential is displaying, is manifesting. Right? I remember William Blake, the poet, said something like, "Eternity is in love with the productions of time." I think we have to say, for us to, the phenomenal world is the way that the essential is in love. It's really important. Again, it's like hiding in the cave, in a Himalayan cave, and being indifferent to everything that's going on. It's so important not to get caught up in a kind of a dualism where we separate ourselves, even as we constantly return in our practice to the emptiness, to the essential nature, to the nature that is in a really essential, important sense is a nothing, and therefore, or a no thing that can become anything. But to use that as a rationalization for being indifferent to what's going on in the world, I think that's a profound, profound delusion that we need to address. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Sensei. I think we'll wrap up with a few words again from Shinryu Roshi. I'm going to hand this over there to Shinryu. Go ahead, Roshi. Thank you.
Right. So we could discuss this and talk about this at great length. This is not the end of the conversation, but so grateful to David for raising the issues for us to continue to absorb and digest. And I just want to say I appreciated the attention on failure, the likelihood or the reality of failure, because that's the truth of it. A failure, of course, is a matter of definition. It depends on what your hopes are or preferences are. But let's face it, we all are feeling a sense of failure in many areas in the current moment of emergency. So how do we deal with the failure? I think is a really important question for us. And I think that David's been really helpful in helping us to think about that. We are all thinking so much of the time about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the country. And it's so easy, and I hear this again and again from folks in the community, that the tendency towards despair and in frustration, which is really debilitating. But that's, as David said, that's precisely what our practice is for, and we're very fortunate to have a practice to enable us to move back and forth between engagement with the world and our own personal reactions to the ups and downs that we experience. So let's remember that. Remember, as we're thinking about the world, that that our practice is a great resource for us that can enable us to engage more effectively. And so in spite of the fact that we're talking about failure, I found this talk encouraging. And so I really want to thank David again for the encouragement and the clarity, and we'll continue to be working on these issues together. Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming out today.